To 16th century Europeans, the Arctic was a place of fabulous marvels. Perpetual daylight illuminated a land that mysteriously attracted the needle of the compass, and from which occasional travelers brought strange tales, the skins of great white bears and horns of unicorns. Elizabethan Englishmen also saw the Arctic as a possible path to the riches of the Orient, bypassing the southern routes from which the Spanish and Portuguese merchants were gaining so much wealth. Not only could England become wealthy through trade in gold, silver, precious stones, and spices, but it could settle the newly discovered strait with, quote, such needy people of our country which now trouble the Commonwealth, and though they want here at home, are enforced to commit outrageous offences, whereby they are daily consumed with the gallows, end quote. A group of London merchants formed a plan of sending Martin Frobisher to find the Northwest Passage on their behalf. With 3 tiny ships, Frobisher set out from London on June 7, 1576. As they passed down the Thames, Queen Elizabeth I waved them farewell from the window of her palace at Greenwich and sent a messenger aboard to express their thanks for their hazardous undertaking. During a stormy 6-week crossing of the North Atlantic, the smallest of Frobisher's 3 ships sank, and another turned back in fear. Only the flagship, the Gabriel, a tiny vessel with a crew of 18, continued westward. Eventually, they spotted Resolution Island, the most easterly outpost of Arctic Canada. To the west of Resolution Island lies a great bay reaching into the heart of Baffin Island. In contrary winds and amidst dangerous ice floes pushed by some of the highest tides in the world, the Gabriel entered this bay and sailed westward. The crew members were convinced that they had found a passage to Asia. About 250 kilometers to the west of Frobisher's first landfall, Frobisher Straits narrowed into a maze of islands separated by narrow channels swirling with tidal currents. Frobisher must have begun to fear that this passage was a dead-end bay. Today it is named Frobisher Bay, at the head of which is situated the town of Iqaluit, the capital of Nunavut. Frobisher met the Inuit of Baffin Island. Over the next days, the 2 groups cautiously traded with one another, sometimes ashore and sometimes aboard the Gabriel. The Inuit appeared familiar with the ships such as this. They tried European food, drank wine, and competed with the mariners in acrobatics on ropes of the ship's rigging. The English hired one of their new Inuit acquaintances to pilot them through the islands to the west. On August 20th, the Inuit man was taken ashore in the ship's boat to get his kayak. The 5 sailors manning the boat were instructed to set him ashore in sight of the ship, but they rowed around the point of land to the Inuit village instead. Neither they or their ship's boat were seen again by the English. Frobisher waited for their return, signaling to them and firing the ship's cannons. After 2 days, he assumed that they had been taken captive and possibly killed. After luring an Inuit man close to the ship, Frobisher picked him and his kayak up from the water and held him hostage for the return of his men. The kidnapping did not have the success that Frobisher hoped. With no ship's boat, a crew of only 13 tired and sick men, and with snow having fallen on deck the previous night, he set sail for England. The Inuk and his kayak were to take on a new role now, as proof to Queen Elizabeth that Frobisher had indeed reached a far and strange land. Unfortunately, he died shortly after reaching England, of cold which he had taken at sea. No one knows what happened to the 5 men, but Inuit folklore tells of strangers that lived among them. Whatever the true story, the incident of the 5 lost sailors was the key event which determined relations between the Inuit and Englishmen for the remainder of the Frobisher venture. It was on this first voyage that a stone was collected from one of the small islands and taken back to England. The consequences were enormous when a London assayer claimed that the stone was a high-grade gold ore. Because of this, Arctic Canada was to experience an invasion of English over the next 2 summers and the first attempt to plant an English colony in the New World. 3 ships were prepared, including the Gabriel and the Michael from the first voyage. The flagship was much larger, Aid, with a crew of more than 100 mariners, soldiers, and gentlemen. Frobisher's first duty was to claim the newly discovered country and its hidden riches for England. After arriving again in Frobisher Bay, an Inuk man was captured, and Frobisher made an attempt to get his missing men back. Again, he received no response. A battle plan was formed, and in a subsequent attack on a nearby settlement, 5 or 6 Inuit were killed, and 1 Englishman was seriously wounded. A woman and her infant son were captured and taken hostage. The English aptly named this location Bloody Point. They sailed away to the north shore of Frobisher Bay, where they had found a small island containing much black rock, which they thought was gold ore. They named it the Countess of Warwick's Island and began mining. By late August, the English had loaded 200 tons of ore and set sail for England, taking with them their 3 Inuit hostages. They arrived home to great acclaim. All 3 of the Inuit died of illness before they could be presented to Queen Elizabeth, however. Assayers in England gave widely differing estimates of the value of the ore brought back by Frobisher in 1577. However, the Company of Cathay chose to believe the most optimistic assays and began to organize the largest Arctic expedition ever mounted. The fleet sailed on May 31st, and on July 1st, it sighted Resolute Island. Then, amidst storms and sea ice conditions worse than those encountered in previous years, the fleet was dispersed and spent a month wandering around Hudson Strait and the mouth of Frobisher Bay. 1 ship was sunk by ice and another deserted to England before the rest were able to assemble at the Countess of Warwick's Island. The 1578 voyage had another objective, to establish the first English colony in the New World. Fortunately for the men who were to establish the colony, half the prefabricated barracks had been on a ship that had sunk by the ice. Many of their supplies had also been lost or spoiled, including much of the beer, which was a staple food. Accordingly, at a council on August 9th, it was decided that no colony would be established that year. Hundreds of tons of ore were unloaded at several locations in England, but over the following winter it became apparent that the rock was worthless. As a result, most of the backers of the Company of Cathay lost their investment. Frobisher was in disgrace, and one of the promoters spent time in prison. The entire story of the deception that caused this first major gold mining fraud in Canadian history has never been discovered. Frobisher never returned to Baffin Island.